right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. But today on the show, we're taking a break from all that to do another of our end of the year roundups. I mean, at the time this is going up, it's looking back at last year roundups. But, we got a lot of movies to cover, so we got to get these in where we could get them. We are talking about our favorite scores of 2024 in today's episode. This is something I do every year along with our usual top 10 list episodes because, as you would know if you've been listening to the show for a while, I am also, along with being a guy who hosts a movie podcast, I am a composer for film. And so, of course, I want to take a minute to, revisit a whole bunch of scores that I liked throughout the year and then talk about them. And today, joining me to talk about them is Brian Skutle from the Sonic Cinema podcast. He joined me last year as well. I'm happy to have him back. And we get into a lot of great film scores from 2024. So that's coming up here in a second. Before we get to it, I want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And with that said, let's talk about our favorite film scores of 2024. All right, Brian Skutle is back with us for another year of film scores. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing very well, David. Thank you very much for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, obviously something that I want to do every year as a composer, and it's always great to have another composer on the show to dig into these things. And it was a great year. I will say I made myself a short list of 25 scores that I ended up going back and listening to, and it was tough to narrow this down.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny because of the fact that, like, early up until like October, November, I wasn't quite sure how I felt about this year as far as film music.
Mhm.
But but with like everything I basically saw from November on, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, this ended up being a pretty great year. I
Yeah.
mean, some of it was catching up to stuff that I had missed earlier in the year, and then some of it was from releases from the last 2 months of the year. And yeah, this ended up being really probably one of my favorite years in recent memory, actually,
Right
with
on.
the ones that I love being
Right
ones that I
on.
genuinely love.
Yeah, I mean there is a lot to get into here. So I mean we might as well just start jumping right into it because we've got 10 each and then we'll also get into some honorable mentions, but let's do it. What do you have for number 10?
So, number 10 for me is one that was very much a late entry into my list. It is an anime that is actually coming out from G Kids this month. It's called The Colors Within, and the composer is Kensuke Ushio. And basically, so to give you some context on what this movie is, because I would imagine most listeners might not even heard about it at this point.
Mhm.
So it's basically a film about a woman, a young girl who can see colors when she looks at other people. She can see, it's sort of like she can see their auras in a way, is how
Sure.
we would kind of describe it. And she forms a band with another classmate and a boy that's nearby. And we see them kind of practice, we see them, talk about music, we see hear them. And she is a student in a Catholic school, and there are ideas of faith and art in it. It's really just a very lovely film. It's very wonderful. The score that Ushio does, it's basically, if you look at the track listings, it's largely just a set of three numbers for each one. And it's basically each track is almost like a trio of instruments. Not
Hmm.
necessarily the same one each and every time, but there's still thematic ideas that come into play. There's still motifs that you kind of hear over and over, ambient type soundscapes that you get over and over. And it's really just a lovely score. It's very playful. It's very beautiful. You can, I know the movie comes out from G Kids, I believe the 24th of this month.
Mm.
So, if you get a chance to watch it, I really recommend it. It's really kind of a fascinating movie. And yeah, that was my number 10.
Right on. Yeah, and speaking of listeners who haven't even heard of it, I'm one of those because I hadn't heard about this either. But it sounds really interesting, and it sounds like a really cool score. Is there a standout track that you want to recommend from that? You said that score kind of has an interesting kind of setup to it.
Yeah, the one track I'll highlight is the first track on the album. It's 244, 233, 227. And again, like I said, these are all of these pieces are kind of like it's all a series of trios, but not all the same instrumentation. And
Hmm.
this one kind of sets the reason I chose the first track is simply because it sets the tone for the rest of the album. I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
especially if you're not familiar with the movie or you haven't seen the movie, it's a good idea of it gives you a good idea of what the score is going to be. And
Yeah.
so yeah, that's the one that I kind of want to highlight.
All right, very cool, very cool. Well, I will go to my number 10, which is going to be The First Omen, the prequel to the classic horror film. This score from Mark Coven, who is clearly referencing Jerry Goldsmith and a lot of little moments here and there, but also doing his own thing as well. Really, really sets this film up for success. And this is a movie that I feel like a lot of people were very surprised by how much they liked it. Because as we know, when we do these reboots and these prequels and these requels and whatever, like a lot of the times it just doesn't work that well. But I remember sitting in the theater when I first watched this movie and just thinking like, God, this score goes hard. And I was
Yeah,
like, wow, this is crazy. And revisiting it in, it's just score form, listening to that entire score and all of those just shrilling vocal performances and just all of that just horrific stuff. I mean, it was almost hard to listen to be honest with you, because it was just so crazy and so over the top. I found this score to be incredibly unnerving, and it really fits the film really well. And like I said, even though very clearly referencing the original, which is such a classic score, does make its own kind of lane as well at the same time, which is a very hard thing to do when you're dealing with a classic like that. And my standout track is called "It's All for You." Which is, definitely one that just, like I said, goes big and goes
hmm
hard and goes just horrific.
no, and it's funny because of the fact that the first Omen and Immaculate came out around the same time this year,
Sure.
and they're both sort of cursed childbirth, women going up against particular sects of the Catholic Church and all of that stuff.
Sure.
Obviously, the first Omen has the pedigree with the iconic Richard Donner movie. But no, I agree with you on this score. It's not my top 10, but yeah, it is a really terrific score that really uses the Goldsmith theme when it does use it very well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult thing to balance when you're like approaching something that's just as iconic as that, and I think it does a really good job. And Immaculate didn't make my top 10, but is a really good score as well. But I'll
Mhm.
just kind of mention that. But what do you got for number 9?
So number 9, I'm going to continue with a horror score of my own. This ended up being. It's funny. This is really kind of the only horror score that I have on my list, but it was a really interesting year for horror music, horror film music. I think
Hmm.
between First Omen And then this one is for the movie Sting,
Oh,
released
sure.
by Wellgo USA. Basically, you got Killer Spider,
Hmm.
and the spider gets bigger and bigger. I it's funny because I really like that movie, and it's also a movie that I think creeped me out so much that I'm not sure that I could ever watch it again.
Yeah.
Just because of the way they use the spider in the
Yeah.
ass in the
Yeah.
film. The score is by Anna Drubick, and she does such a wonderful job of really musically giving us the spider.
Hmm.
I mean, really getting the little rhythmic ideas of, like a spider skittering around on the ground and stuff like that in her score. It's very creepy, very wicked, and really, really dark sense of humor in this score, in this movie as well.
Hmm.
The one track that we go, again, I'm going to go first track. Charlotte's theme, it really sets the tone for this score well. And I really love this score.
Right on. Yeah, I actually haven't seen it yet. When this came out, it was right around the same time as Infested, and I was like, I only can handle one spider movie this year. I just can't do two. But I would love to catch up on this eventually because, yeah, I heard that actually the score is really good, but also I've heard that it's very funny and like
Yeah.
definitely worth checking out. So I'm looking forward to watching that movie for sure. Um, my number nine is definitely a polarizing movie, but I think the score is fantastic, whether you like the movie or not. And that is Sasquatch Sunset from the Zellner brothers. The composer is the Octopus Project, and this is just a weird movie about a family of Sasquatches living in the wilderness, and they're just kind of going about doing their thing. It's very plotless and almost kind of unfolds like a fucked up nature documentary, basically. And it's super weird and kind of highlights these Sasquatches just being like kind of these big dumb animals. But then there's kind of moments of like mystery in it and like wondering like, well, where is this actually going and what's going to happen? And then all of a sudden the emotions come and like it's a very strange movie, and the score really reflects that really well. I'm also a sucker for like Americana infused scores, and there's a lot of really beautiful guitar based stuff on this score. The standout track that I picked is called "The Foragers," which really kind of leans into that really well. But a lot of the music in this film, it fits so well, but you could easily see it also being in an actual nature documentary too, which is a really funny kind of line to try to, toe there because it's, is it going to be something where you're like, oh, like what exactly are they trying to tell us with this? Or is it going to actually like fit and elevate the thing? And I think that the Octopus Project really does elevate this film with the score that they put together. And I'm not familiar with anything else from the Octopus Project. I know they're kind of like in experimental music and stuff like that, but it's a really interesting piece.
This actually makes me really want to rewatch that film because I did really like it when I did get to it, but I don't. I'll be honest, I don't really remember much about the score. But you mentioning it makes me want to revisit it
Yeah,
just for the music because in fact I did real I found myself very fascinated by the film. I just at the end of the year you only have so much time to revisit
sure.
films, and so I mean, but I do want to now that you bring it up, I do kind of want to revisit this movie and give the score a listen because of the fact that yeah, I thought it was a terrific, unusual film. So
Yeah, very unique, very unusual, and strange. But let's go to your number eight.
So my number 8 is John Batiste's score for Saturday Night, the Jason
Hmm.
Reitman film about the opening night of Saturday Night Live. Uh, Batiste. I mean, he's the band leader on Colbert. He co-won the Oscar for Soul with Reznor Ross, and I love that this score. And he does appear on screen in this one. But what I love about his score here, it's just very high energy, very rhythmic. It very much keeps the anxiety of opening night
Hmm.
going at basically every moment. That's one of the things I really liked about what Reitman did with this film, even if it's not historically accurate to what happened that night. You feel the anxiety of putting on a live show for the first time and doing something unusual and bold. For the one track, I went with Builder's Theme, Clean Shirt, Full House Variation 1. One of the things I love about Batiste's score is that there are so many different variations on so many different ideas, and all of them kind of fit within the larger framework of a score. And I really just loved his score for this movie.
Absolutely. This is actually one of my honorable mentions. I loved it as well. And I think it's really impressive that, again, kind of to bring it back to what I was saying with both of my first two picks, actually, to be able to make your own thing, but it kind of fits in really well with what we know of the property to begin with. I think all the music feels like it could fit right there in Saturday Night Live with the opening theme music and like any
Hmm.
late night, show music, but then it's also just like a perfect film score at the same time. And
Yeah.
so I'm with you. This is a great pick. I really like this one.
Mm.
I will go for number 8. I think a couple of years ago when I did this list, the first one of this series was on my list as well, but I'm coming back for it. It's Smile 2 from composer Cristobal Tapia de Veer returning for this one. And this movie, it's kind of hard to separate how good the score is, which is fantastic, and I love the score in the first one as well. But from how great the music in this movie is, the songs from this fictional pop star Sky Riley are just so damn good. And I think that something that Cristobal Tapia de Vera does really well is make these sounds that just sound so inhuman in his scores, and you listen to him and you're just like, what is he even doing to make this? Like, it sounds like he's torturing the instruments. And this one, I think it kind of expanded upon the first movie by getting a little bit more synthy, which fits really well to kind of marry it to those pop songs. And I think it's a
Hmm.
really great idea, a really interesting way to approach this, and still just as horrific as the first one. I think that what he's doing just makes everything just so creepy and unsettling. It's really really intense, and I'll go with the track "Deluxe" as my main pick from the score album. Yeah, really love everything that he's doing in this.
I will be honest, I haven't watched either of the Smile movies. First one I just haven't gotten to. I have heard good things about the second one, so I do think I'll probably get to these at some point.
Hmm.
Um, but no, it's again, I mean, I've heard really good things about this movie and with the score, and this was just this was a really strong year for horror films,
Oh
just
yeah.
in general. And yeah, I think I'm looking forward to, and I love that already. Like we have 6 movies that we've highlighted here. We don't have any overlap so far. I'm
I
sure we'll
know.
get some at some point. but I love the fact that we've been able to highlight so many films already with this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, it has been a really strong year for horror. I think on my top 10 episode, I had like four or five horror movies in the top 10, which is crazy for me. But yeah, great year for that. What's your number seven?
So my number seven is one that was an early favorite, and it's kind of stayed that way throughout the year. It's Clint Mansell's score for "Love Lies Bleeding," the Rose
Mm,
Glass film. I love that this is very synth heavy. It's very more noirish. It's very pulsating in that '80s movie type of way. It really just gets to that '80s crime drama feel to it very
mm,
well in a way that feels very distinctly Mansell as
sure.
well. Going back to Pi, like when you
Hmm.
when you consider his score for that, which is again very synth heavy, and it's just a terrific film, and it's a terrific film, but it's also a wonderful score from him. And my one track is "Turn Up the Heat." But I mean, honestly, like any of these tracks just emphasize what I love about this score.
Yeah, it's a great one. Another of my honorable mentions. You've probably heard me say how much I love Clint Mansell before on the show. I've been reviewing albums on this app called Music Board. That's just like a letterbox clone, but just for music. And so I reviewed all these scores that I listened to. And I had mentioned in my review on Music Board that if Love Lies Bleeding had come out in like 92 or something, this would be like everybody's favorite score ever. You know, this is like this would have taken over at that moment in time. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great one though. Definitely glad you included it. Um, my number seven, like you said, also another like early in the year favorite that just kind of stuck with me, and I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this one. It's Daddio. This is from director Christy Hall, who also wrote and produced the film. It's her debut, actually. And the score is from Dickon Hinckliffe, who, funny enough, also scored Locke, which is another film about, people just completely set in a car the entire time. But this is just a really interesting little film about. This cab driver played by Sean Penn who picks up someone from the airport played by Dakota Johnson, and the whole entire movie takes place in the car. It never leaves the car until the very end, and the score, the very seamless effects, and just the really great writing all have to kind of carry this thing. Of course, along with those great performances from those two leads. And it really does a great job. And the score kind of, in a way, it reminds me a little bit of like what we might have heard from like Thomas Newman in the early 2000s, like that kind of a thing. But just really beautifully done, very melancholy, but very beautiful at the same time. And the fact that it's able to, keep this film moving is some really heavy lifting, honestly. And they do a really great job with that. The opening track is the one I'm going to spotlight here. It's just called Opening. But the whole score from beginning to end really works really well.
Another movie where I've only seen it once. I did really like it. And again, I don't really remember the score that much, so I do kind of want to seek out this score to listen to it a bit.
Yeah,
No, it's interesting. It takes a lot of craft to make a movie like that work,
sure.
and because in a single location because it's only a handful of characters and you have to keep things moving. It's tricky, but yeah, and music can be a huge part of that working. Yeah, I'm gonna need to revisit this score. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great just on its own, just listening to the the score album. So you can definitely just go check that out. But number 6, what do you got?
so number six, I it might be one that's on yours. I'm not quite sure. It is for The Brutalist by
Okay.
Daniel Blumberg. This one, this is a score is very epic. It deals a lot in melody. It's very bombastic. It's got a lot of big motifs and big themes going along with it
Hmm.
as it tells this very expansive story about a Jewish immigrant who is coming to America and finds himself brushing up against power with Guy Pearce as he tries to create a big, unusual architecture.
Hmm.
And it is the film itself was fantastic. All 3 hours, 35 minutes of it really land with me. And Bloomberg scores a big reason why it sustains as long as it does
Yeah.
for that runtime. The one track I'll hit is the main one, the first one, Overture, parentheses ship. I think again, it's about setting the tone for the entire score, and this one does.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And yes, this is our first overlap. I'll be bringing it up again later. But
Okay.
yeah, I echo everything you said there, and I'll talk a little more later as well. My number 6 is The Substance, which is, in a lot of ways, I feel like the movie of 2024. And the score from composer Rafferty is just crazy. it's just it's just an absolutely insane horror score, a mix of industrial electronic beats and just these just horrific textured stabs and ambient shrieks and just all kinds of stuff that fit everything so well. And it's such a bonkers crazy movie. Obviously, if you haven't seen The Substance yet, please go see it because it's just amazing. But the fact that this movie goes from the sexy to the depressing to the horrific to the bonkers, it really just kind of gets it all in there. My only knock against this score is that if you listen to the score album, that Pump It Up song is not on it, which I do not understand because it's so awesome. And I know it's a separate thing, but I mean, come on, it should have been on there.
Yeah.
So I'll put the title track, The Substance, as my standout piece. Yeah, this like I said, it's one of the best movies of the year, and the score fits right along with it.
Yeah, the substance is absolutely crazy, and the score does a really great job of emphasizing that. It really gets to the satirical ideas as well as the horror elements in the film, and yeah, it's one of those scores that is just right for the film that it is
Hmm.
accompanying. It
Yeah,
it
yeah,
really is.
absolutely. You couldn't picture it being a different way. Like it couldn't go traditional horror, but it also
No,
couldn't go like straight up. EDM or anything like that, and it kind of
Yeah.
bridges that so well. So,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to your number five.
So my number five is an early year release that I found myself listening to more than I expected to. The film is Dev Patel's Monkey Man. The
Okay.
composer is Jed Kurzel, and I love that. And you get a lot of the Indian kind of Bollywood aesthetic in the score here, but because of how much of the movie is crime based, is based in the ring. His fighting is very visceral, is very brutal, is very energetic. And it really has a feel to it that was very rich to listen to, and very much it was one of those that had deep listenability to me for throughout. There are so many tracks I could go with. I went with Tiger. I think it is the I think it's a score. I think it's a track that really emphasizes a lot of the strengths of this score. And
Mm.
the soundtrack album does have dialogue, but I think this is a case where the dialogue edited into the soundtrack is actually a benefit. I
Hmm.
think it does a very good job of being a part of listening to the score in general.
Right on. Yeah, that is always kind of a tough thing for a score album to kind of handle, make it actually listenable once it has that stuff added in. Yeah, I remember liking the music from this one a lot, but I did not revisit it as part of my 25 short list, so I haven't heard it since the theater. But yeah, I remember it being really good, and I'm glad you're bringing it up here. I've heard a lot of people kind of shout this one out too in a lot of the end of the year wrap ups. So I'm gonna have to check it out at some point. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to it for sure. Um, I will go number five with Challengers, the Trent Reznor Atticus Ross score for the Luca Guadagnino film. I mean, I just got done saying that the Substance couldn't go straight up EDM, but they sure do here go pretty damn electronic. But this is gotta be, even though I've got it like right in the middle, it's gotta be the most memorable score of the year. I feel like it's like the one that got people talking the most. It is one that kind of just drills itself into your brain, and it fits so well in the movie. I know when this film first was coming out, a lot of people were like, what are you talking about as a techno score or whatever? Like, it's not even like film music or whatever. But when you watch the movie, it just works so well with getting into just the energy and the feelings going back and forth between these three at the center of the film, and also it being a sports movie at the same time as it's a love triangle movie. It definitely needs that kind of a beat to keep things moving, and they knew that and they went for it. And also mixed in, I feel like people are forgetting that there is some weird kind of piano based darkness mixed in within all of that stuff, as well as the excellent song over the end credits that Trent Reznor sings on. So there's a lot going on in this score, and I think it's one that people are going to look back on fondly. The Signal is the standout track that I included here. But really, there's a lot of music on this that I could go with.
I'm going to be very controversial in this.
Hmm.
I I came to this movie really late. Like, and when
Hmm.
I say really late, I mean December.
Yeah.
I was not a huge fan of this movie.
Hmm.
It didn't really do much of anything for me, and that kind of extended to the score. I'll be
Hmm.
honest, like I think we talked about it a little bit last year when it was on, when the killer brought came up at one point, where it's like I feel like I'm not. I mean, I do recognize that there's some slightly different ideas that Reznor Ross are putting into the score for this, but I found myself much more interested in their work over the past few years when it hasn't been predominantly electronic.
Yeah.
Like Bones and All was a great example. Mank was a great example. Even Soul, which their contributions were largely electronic, but was interesting the way they used the electronics. I'll be honest, like this movie kind of bounced off of me. I'm not a huge fan of the score in general.
All right.
It's this year.
I will say, I hope after Tron Ares that they kind of take a little bit of a break. I think that they're risking overexposure at this point. They have scored so many films over the last 10 years, it's just out of control.
Well, and the thing is, it's like I look at how the early awards have gone, and I'm like, are we really talking about giving them their third Oscar in 15 years?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
really? I don't know, and it's like I love overall. I'm a fan of them as composers. I still love the Social Network. Again, I think Mank is terrific. It's been a while since I've seen Gone Girl, so I haven't heard that score in a while. But I mean, I'm kind of with you. I'd like to see them a take some time away, and even if they don't take a break from film scoring, they at least kind of branch out a little bit more. Because
Yeah.
I think when they branch out a little bit more is when they've been really, really interesting over the past few years.
Yeah. No, I absolutely could see that. But yeah, let's go to your number four. What do you got next?
So my number four is probably the score that I listened to the most this year. It is Amelia Warner's score for A Young Woman in the Sea,
Okay.
which is a based on the true story of the first woman to swim the English Channel. Daisy Ridley's the lead character, and this is just a great example of a composer understanding a genre, what the genre entails, and playing to the emotional aspect of that genre. This I unabashedly love the underdog sports genre.
Hmm.
Um and this film just hit all my buttons in that respect. And Warner's score, I mean, yes, it gets very emotional, gets very heroic in a lot of ways, but it also has a slightly different quality to it in the way it's orchestrated that is not, strictly speaking, what we expect from this genre. And I
Hmm.
really love that. The one track I'll point out is Lost in the Shallows, which is a cue that takes place later in the film as Trudy, the main character, is swimming the English Channel, and at a moment where we're not sure whether she's going to survive.
Hmm.
And this is just a score that I absolutely love. I'm glad that it got shortlisted for the Oscars. I don't think it will get nominated, but I'm glad to see it at least made the final 15.
Right on. Yeah, and I haven't seen the film yet, so I haven't heard the score either. But yeah, I mean that genre, it's kind of you're in a box. So like, if she's
Yeah.
able to find some new ways to approach that, then that must be pretty damn cool.
Hmm.
So my number four, speaking of genres where you kind of know what to expect, but I feel like this composer did a really great job of doing some interesting things in that genre. It's Twisters. The score from Benjamin Wallfish, who had a great year also with Alien Romulus this year, which is
Hmm.
also a great score. But I love this movie, and of course, the soundtrack is filled with a lot of like modern country rock songs, and but speaking strictly about the score, it's kind of like the best of that kind of blockbuster. The thing you would expect from a Spielberg or any of those kinds of people, and I think Lee Isaac Chung as a filmmaker really stepped up and did something that fits perfectly into that mold. And Benjamin Wallfish is just right along for the ride and making some really beautiful stuff that is exciting. It's adventurous, but then it also kind of highlights the beauty of all of these kind of I mean, my standout track is called Nature's Masterpiece. I think that kind of tells you that he knows what he's doing when it comes to scoring this kind of film. And some of the tracks do kind of try to meld in with the soundtrack, all the country stuff, which, is kind of cool. There's some Americana elements thrown in there as well. I like some of that. But yeah, I think overall, though, this is just a really, really fantastic score that really surprised me as the movie did. And I think Lee Isaac Chung as a director, I mean, his last film, Minari, with Emil Mosseri, one of the best scores of the last decade. And so
Hmm.
he clearly knows how to pick great composers who are going to do something special.
Yeah, it's funny because of the fact that I did enjoy Twisters, but I obviously when I think about it, I was thinking almost exclusively in terms of the soundtrack.
Yeah.
This hearing you talk about the Wallfish's work makes me want to revisit that score.
Yeah.
And it's funny because of the fact that you talked about it, the way he sort of ties into the songs and the song and the score kind of working in tandem. That's a little bit like what the original Twister did with Mark Mancini's music. Like you had
Sure.
Eddie Van Halen doing the guitar, and
Yep.
then obviously they were on the soundtrack, but then Mark Mancini's score very much plays into that as well. So I do kind of want to re-listen to his score on its own and see what I feel because of the fact that, yeah, I mean, obviously the country songs are what resonated with me more when it came to that movie. But yeah, and I agree with you on Wallfish as far as Alien Romulus. He did a terrific job with that one. I am curious to re-listen or rewatch Twisters and pay attention more to Wallfish's score.
Yeah, no, it's a great one. I really love that movie. But yeah, let's go on to number three.
So number three for me is from a composer who I don't know that I don't know that I should admit that they kind of surprised me this time out, but they really kind of did. And I think it's because of the fact that I've been so used to them working with a specific composer that
Mm,
their work in this one it feels very much like a very pleasant return to a type of score that I forgot that they could do. It is Alexandra Desplat's score for the piano lesson, the Malcolm
okay.
Washington film. I love the way he emphasizes the period. I love the way he brings in dissonant piano. There's a lot of rhythmically complex elements into it, but it's also just really strikingly beautiful. And it really is a great compliment to the vision that Malcolm Washington has for this film. And this surprised me because I'm so used to Desplat now with his collaborations with Wes Anderson. I almost forgot that he can do a really strong, heavy, dramatic score.
Hmm.
And this is an excellent example of that. And it really pleasantly surprised me and really won me over in a lot of ways. The The one track I'll highlight is Bernice's story. Pivotal moment in the film where we start to really learn the backstory of the piano, which basically is what sets the narrative in motion.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen this one yet either. I don't think it's out here yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to
Well,
it.
it's
And
Netflix.
okay, is it on Netflix now?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Netflix. So
Okay. Right on. Well, there you go. It goes on Netflix and then we don't hear about it
yeah,
afterwards. But yeah, no, I love Alexander Desplat. And that's exciting to hear that score from him this year was as good as that. I'm going to have to go check that out now. My number three is The Brutalist, which we have already talked about a little bit, but I'll just add that this score, it just does all different things from the huge, like that overture ship that you mentioned, which would have been my standout track, but I'll actually pivot and go to some of the smaller stuff on the score, like the track Library. Which goes on the opposite direction. It uses the same theme, but in a much more subtle and pretty and tender kind of way. And yeah, I feel like this score and the film itself just kind of putting everything about the American experience all together into a movie. I mean, that is really kind of what's going on here with Brady Corbett's film, and the score absolutely mirrors that. And yeah, it's just an incredibly powerful piece of music, this whole thing.
yeah, and it's funny when I was doing my short list for my Film Critic Association votes this year. Uh, Brutalist was one that I really did consider putting in my top three, and it was only because of how well Desplat's music, how much Desplat's music hit me that ended up getting the slot. But I mean, I think the Brutalist is a terrific score. I mean, it could very easily been my top three. I four and five. The reason I put those four and five is because I've found myself listening to them so much. There's a re-listenability to those that
Mm,
a lot of my other scores just on this list just do not have.
yeah,
And so that's the main reason they're four and five ahead of the Brutalist, which is a terrific score.
right on. Well, what's number two?
So number two for me is a film that I think it's a film that kind of got left off to the side, unfortunately, which is a shame because it is truly one of the best films of the year. It is Evil Does Not Exist from the director of Drive My Car.
Hmm.
It's currently on Criterion Channel now. It is about a company that is trying to do sort of a high rent camping site in a small town in Japan. And when they come to pitch the idea, they get met with a lot of resistance in a way that changes at least the people who have come to pitch the idea.
Hmm.
And we see a delicate balance between man and nature in this film in a way that is very unusual. It's very experimental, and that goes to the score by Iko Ishibashi. And it's sort of like the colors within, sort of like the Brutalist. If you've listened to that score, it's basically a series of variations on specific ideas. It's repeated notions of ideas. It doesn't formally fit within the confines of a traditional score, My
Hmm.
one track is Evil Does Not Exist V2, signifying version 2. And basically, like you get a lot of these evocative soundscapes. And if you're familiar with me as a composer, I'm very much into soundscapes. I'm very much into ambient music, which makes my number one, which we'll get to, absolute no brainer for me. But Evil Does Not Exist works really well in a classical idiom of sort of these little chamber pieces that build a larger framework for a score. And if you have Criterion Channel, I cannot recommend watching it enough, and pay attention to the score because the score is really fascinating.
Right on. Yeah, I have not seen the film yet. I would like to, and I loved her score for Drive My Car. So I'm sure that the collaboration here is just as good, and definitely looking forward to checking this one out. So for my number two, real quick before I say it, I'll just mention we are recording this. It's like kind of getting to the middle of January. If we had recorded this a week ago, my number one would have been number three, and then my last one would have been two, and this would have been my number one. But I ended up re-listening to some things, and I was like, "Oh my god, okay, I gotta reorder this." So there's a little bit of a shakeup going on here in the last couple of days. But that being said, my number two is Conclave, from director Edward Berger and composer Volker Bertelmann, who, of course, won best score for his All Quiet on the Western Front a couple years ago. And again, I know a lot of people were not very happy about that score winning. I didn't really like it as much either, but I love his work here. It is so damn good. And this film is one of my favorite films of the year as well. And it's a hard film to classify between like drama, thriller, which is what it's kind of marketed as, dark comedy almost. And the score is just as difficult to figure out. It kind of goes with these like the main theme is like these big overblown almost action movie, stabs, just but then when these men are kind of in their like little self-important kind of ritualistic ways trying to figure out how to nominate this new pope, it also goes into these very playful moments, very dramatic moments. It's just in so many different areas, but it's all tied together so perfectly well. I'll go with the track Tears as my standout, which I think is kind of the obvious one, but it's just so damn good. And it is a piece of music I could listen to at any time. And this is easily, for me, the most listenable score of the year. It's the one that I feel like I will continue to go back to for years and years, and just keep just diving in and listening to it because it's just so damn enjoyable. But yeah, just incredible work all around. And I know going into award season, I feel like the Brutalist and Conclave and Challengers are kind of the three that are dominating for the most part. I would be happy with any of the three, but Conclave is definitely the one I'll be rooting for.
It's funny because of the fact that it's funny. This one. I would say this one is on one of my honorable mentions.
Mm.
It's funny because between All Quiet on the Western Front and Conclave, it seems to me that Bertelman just doesn't have a subtle bone in his body as a composer.
Yeah, that's
That's
fair.
not
That's fair.
necessarily a bad thing, though,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because it's funny because I was very mixed on All Quiet on the Western Front winning the Oscar in general that year. Um, but at the same time, in preparation for Conclave, I did go back and listen to the score for Western Front individually, and I'll admit I have a bit more appreciation for it now than I did in the context of the film. I still don't necessarily think it would be my top choice that year,
Hmm.
but I do agree with you that this one does have a lot of listenability to it. And, it's, and, him not being a subtle composer, I think works in this film's favor because there's like almost nothing subtle with what's going on in
Exactly.
other than the performances. There's almost nothing subtle going on with the narrative in Conclave. Um, I'm not sure how I feel about him winning his second Oscar in 3 years, but I mean, the thing is, it's like I get why it's in. I get why it's in the conversation. I do. And look, I get why Challengers is in the conversation as well because Resident Rots have been nominated for several times now, and they're
Yeah.
clearly among the favorite film composers working today. Um, I'm curious to, I am kind of curious to go out and search out other work that Bertelman's done because of the fact that I'm curious if he has another mode as a
Hmm.
composer. And I do enjoy his work for Conclave. I agree with you; it's very re-listenable. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what he is as a composer away from Berger's work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would definitely like to hear what he does when he's not in this mode. And also, like you just said, I think as much as I do like the music he made for All Quiet on the Western Front, I just didn't think it fit that well, and so that made it a strange choice to be running away with all the awards. Whereas here, it just fits perfectly within the
Yeah,
context of the film.
yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Well, we're to our number ones. What do you got?
My number one. As soon as I heard of this score, it was far and away my top one. I listened to it basically the entire next day, and I had so if you know me, I do a lot of traveling in my job, and I was actually traveling between states the day after I watched this movie. And this was basically all I listened to. It is the score for the film Flow
Yeah.
by director. I'm gonna wreck these names. Jens Zil Balodis and Richard Zalupe.
Yeah, I would have
I
done just as
apologize.
bad.
Um, I this score is so by speed as a composer, as a listener. There's something very playful about this film. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it's on VOD now. And although I would have loved to have seen this theatrically, I saw it by a screener. Um, it basically is. It's an animated film. It is basically a film where we follow a black cat and a dog and a capybara and a bird and a lemur as flood waters are rising in nature. And there are no humans, there's no actual dialogue. It's just a series of sort of vignettes and sort of it's an adventure and it's very dreamlike in the way that it plays out. And that really, the score captures that beautifully. It's very playful at times, it's very ambient. It's it's got a lot of electronics, which again is completely my shit. And
Hmm.
I just love listening to this. There's something just undeniably beautiful about this music. And the one track I want to highlight is near the end of the film. It's called Reflection. It really gets to the ambient quality of the music. It gets to the emotional themes of the music. It's just this score bowled me over the second I heard it, and it was absolutely going to be my favorite from the year after that.
It's a great pick. It is a great, great score, and it didn't make my list, but I love this movie and I love the music, and I, it totally makes sense why you would pick a score like this. It's absolutely beautiful, and as a an animal lover, it's just such a fun movie and
Yeah.
such a unique movie as well. So yeah, great pick. Glad you brought it in here. I will go for my number one. A score that I remember being blown away by in the theater, but I feel like nobody else is kind of championing it, and they should be. It is A Different Man. From director Aaron Schimberg, composed by Umberto Smerilli. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. But this is a really interesting and darkly funny movie about a guy with a facial deformity who has a experimental procedure to remove that deformity and ends up looking like Sebastian Stan. And then then a guy who looks like himself ends up showing up, and things get very weird and abstract and weird. But the score. It leans into a kind of noir style feel that like really plays up the mystery of it all while also playing up the absurdity of it all. It's also incredibly beautiful while also being melancholy because like that is really the main thing about this movie is just like that loneliness and need for connection that these characters all have, even with themselves. And the whole thing is just so memorable and beautiful and weird and kind of captures all of that. And it definitely leans into like a lot of melodrama, but it's like so on purpose and like fits so well in what the film is about, especially considering that these are all creatives. They're, either in writing or in acting. And so it fits in really well with everything that the characters are all about. But I will use the track Melancholy as my standout. And again, this is just a very noir tinged score that really comes out so much more beautiful than you would expect for like a small little movie like this. And really made a big impression on me. And like I said, I had to rearrange my list in the last couple of days, but I really think that this is one that I'm going to be talking about for a long time.
Okay. I've not watched this movie yet. I know I need to get to it, especially if it looks like Sebastian Stan could possibly be in that very competitive Best Actor race.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how I'm curious to see how all these categories play out, honestly, because I don't think anybody really knows anything at this point. And no, I know this one's coming on Max, I think this week. At least the week that we're recording it, I think it comes out on Max. I'll have to check it out then. But yeah, I will definitely make a point of paying attention to the score when I do watch it.
Right on. Yeah, I definitely want to hear what you think of it when you get a chance to watch it. But let's go for some honorable mentions. What do you got?
One of my big honorable mentions. Well, we already talked about Conclave. I would put Alien Romulus in there as well, Benjamin Malfish.
Hmm.
Uh, I would also put Woman of the Hour, the score by Dan Romer and Mike Tuccillo for that film,
I haven't
does
seen that
a
yet.
really great job of being tense and getting to the true crime nature of the movie, but also really goosing up the anxiety as we watch this story unfold. It
Mm,
really was a terrific score to listen to. Dune Part Two, Hans Zimmer.
yeah.
I was somebody who, you know, as much of a massive Zimmer fan as I am, I'm somebody who is like, okay, I guess he's winning his second Oscar for Dune, which I overall I liked his work, but it didn't blow me away the way it did other people. Will say though, I think part two made me appreciate part one more. That
Mm,
goes for the film and Zimmer's score.
sure.
And I almost feel like part of the reason this score is ineligible is because of the fact that then we'd have three previous winners basically being the head of the class in Reznor, Ross, Bertelman, and Zimmer. And it's like, I mean, what are we doing? Are we just recycling the same three composers every other
That's a good
year?
point. Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not the official reason Dune Part Two got nominated, but I mean, if John Williams can get nominated for Rise of Skywalker, how can Zimmer not get nominated for Dune Part Two?
Sure.
I really love the music for Inside Out 2 by Andrea Datzman. I
Oh
thought she
yeah.
did a really good job of building on the work that Michael Giacchino did for the original. A Quiet Place Day One, Alexis Grapsis. Those, I mean, that movie really shocked me as being a prequel that really I think stands apart from the previous films in the franchise. But I think it's interesting the way that 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 franchise Loki has had some pretty interesting scores, and I really was impressed by his work in that film. Um, and I also really liked Furiosa Mad Max Saga, Tom
Yeah.
Holkenborg. I think he did a great job on that sequel, and his music is as essential to that in Fury Road as George Miller's images.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, I will. I've got a bunch here. I will just quickly, some of the stuff we've already mentioned. You brought up Love Lies Bleeding, Dune Part Two, Alien Romulus, Saturday Night. I also kind of had tied in my honorable mentions Furiosa and Godzilla X Kong, both from Junkie XL. He's great. I mean, come on.
I do really like his music for Godzilla X Con as well. I could have easily
Yeah.
put that on there.
For sure.
Yeah.
Another one I really liked, Rebel Ridge from Brooke and Will Blair. That is a really tense score. It's kind of one note as the film is. It's just tension for like 90 minutes long. But it's really, really good and definitely one I was considering. And then I'll also throw two more on the honorable mentions. Aggro Drift, the new Harmony Korine film with music from Arab music. This movie is absolutely an acquired taste. You've got to really be into Harmony Korine's specific brand of ridiculousness. And the score is the same because it all just sounds like unfinished rap beats. And it's so weird. But I mean, if you're talking about, 100 years of film scores and we already know like what a quote unquote film score sounds like, why not try some new things, you know? And I feel like that is definitely one that tries new things. And then this kind of fits in with my first couple of horror picks, The First Omen and Smile 2, but Red Rooms, which is a very
Hmm.
disturbing and weird movie. The score from Dominique Plant really, really fits that film really well and heightens just how disturbing that movie is.
Excellent movie. Excellent movie. That's been a favorite of mine since I watched it at the Atlanta Film Festival last year. It like you said, it gets really dark and disturbing. and yeah, the score. Yeah, I didn't even think about the score for that. I just think so much about the images and the performance. I didn't even think about the music. Rebel Ridge. It's like that's just a great example of genre done well. I
Yeah.
think, and it's like I am definitely. I haven't seen a whole lot of Harmony Korine, I'll admit. Kids just bounced off of me when I saw it 30 years ago. I think the only other movie of his I think I ever really saw was Spring Breakers. But I
Hmm.
will say I like the use of music in that movie. But the thing I will say, based on what you were saying about that score, just you know, the thing that I think a lot of people need to consider is, we're barely like 130 years into the history of film. Like, history of film
Yeah.
is not long. And I mean, for the first 30 years or so, people were using pre existing music to score films. Very few
Sure.
movies were scored originally. So I think there's certainly validity in any type of way you decide to score movies. And I think that is one of the things I think that is one of the things that is really fascinating about this art form. And I think it's one of the things that's unique about this art form because of the fact that, I mean, you can take something that is pre-existing and just use it in a way that completely doesn't necessarily change into something else, but really uses it in a way that greatly um
Yeah. The
emphasizes
context
the emotion.
matters.
I mean, you know, look at Deadpool and Wolverine. Like the
Hmm.
use of Bye 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 and Like a Prayer in both
Yeah.
of those in that movie. I mean, it's like those are excellent examples of using music in a movie.
Yeah.
And, it's not original it's using. Saturday night, like you were saying, how it really ties into that late night sound, and especially Saturday Night Live sound. But no, I mean, I think that is one of the things that's really exciting about this genre, and one of the reasons I've really taken to it over the years is because of the fact that it's very adaptable. It's adaptable to classical music. It's adaptable to popular music. It's adaptable to mixtures of classical and popular music. And then you do have some composers who do completely different things with a movie that you may not have necessarily thought of before. And it's
Sure.
it's really exciting.
It absolutely is, and it's part of why I love working in film music. Getting to just try things and see what works, see what sticks, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's part of the reason why I wanted to do film music for the longest time, and
absolutely,
it's been something I've been excited to do when I have had the chance to do film music.
absolutely. Well, Brian, I think we had a great conversation here. Lots of really good picks. Tell people where they can find you, Sonic Cinema, and everything you're up to.
My main website is www.sonic-cinema.com. Basically, everything branches out from there. Like David, I also have Bandcamp for my original music, including the original score that I did a couple of years ago for Player PhD, a small independent film. And you can also hear a lot of my other music there as well. Sonic Cinema Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. I definitely want to have David on in the future. It's been a couple of years since he's been on there, so I need to have him
Sure.
back on. And then, yeah, I mean, basically, yeah, just go to www.sonic-cinema.com and you will find basically anywhere you can want to find me at.
Right on, right on. Well, Brian, as always, great getting you back on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
I look forward to it.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about some of our favorite film scores of 2024. Thank you to Brian Skutle for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. I'd love to hear from you if you have some picks for your favorite scores of 2024, anything that we didn't mention. Please send them in. I'd love to hear, and maybe I'll read some of those on the next trailers episode, like I always do with puzzle pieces, or just send them in just because I want to hear them. So that way I can go check them out. So yeah, do write in. You could do that, of course, on social media at Piecing Pod, in our Facebook group Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, and on the website piecingpod.com. And while you're at it, make sure you are subscribed to the show so you'll find out about all the new episodes as they come. And also, don't forget, we do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. As a matter of fact, I think there's 2 film scores on there that are unreleased. I never put them out as like their own score albums, but I put them as exclusives on the Patreon. And I think I'm going to have another one of those hitting there very soon, actually. So keep an eye out. But you can sign up for the Patreon at patreon.com/bydavidrosen if you want to support the show. But you're also supporting the show just by being out there listening, sharing, commenting, liking, all of those things. So let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And on these score episodes, I always got to look to something that I scored in this particular year that we're talking about. So, in the year 2024, I scored a few things, but I'm going to go with a piece from a film called The Angel of Death, which was another collaboration with the filmmaker Chris Johnson, who I've worked with many times over the years. We're going to be working on another feature coming up here in a few weeks, I think, actually. He's going to be getting me that. But yeah, this was something that we worked on last year, The Angel of Death, which I believe you'll be able to see soon. I'm not quite sure when, but whenever it is up on some kind of site where you can watch it, I will definitely let you know. But this is a piece of music from the score. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that episode. And to all the composers whose tracks I played little clips of, as usual, please don't, make me take this down. If you do, I've got a version without the clips. I'll upload in its place. But thank you so much for your music, and thanks for letting us play and talk about it. And congratulations on all your success. And yeah, thanks.